So let's talk about what happens when the client doesn't do the behavioral experiment. This issue is a bugaboo for a lot of therapists. We tend to take these things really personally and can get on the defensive really fast. A very famous cognitive behavior therapist, a man that I idolized when I was in graduate school by the name of Don Meichenbaum, talked about resistance or non-adherence this way. He said, resistance is a failure on the part of the therapist, not the client. What he meant was that it's the job of the therapist to create experiments that people can do. And if the person doesn't do it, by definition, the therapist didn't do his or her job. What I think when people have not done an experiment is that's a perfect outcome. The very things that have been blocking the client and getting in the way, that brought them in maybe even, have shown up once again. So I take the attitude, whatever happens between the first session and the next session, that session and then one after that, is perfect. We can utilize anything that happens to benefit the client. Now here's a question to contemplate. Who's in a better position to experience a failure? The client who's suffering, or the therapist who supposedly is this pillar of psychological strength? It's you. You're the one who can experience failure. And in fact, you should be bending over backwards to keep the client from having any sense that they have failed or let you down in any way. The last thing they need is yet another failure experience in their life. The first thing you can do to prevent that is to take the blame for what happened. It doesn't stop there, though. A lot of times, we overestimate the complexity of even a simple behavioral experiment. Something as simple as going to a park or taking a walk 3 times a week actually involves hundreds of behaviors, hundreds of sequences. So you should be curious about what the client did do, not what they didn't do. It's possible that what they did do was actually the first steps of a complex chain of behaviors that would have led to the rest of the experiment being run. If we get into a mindset where we just throw out the experiment and we try to move on and not talk about what happened in a productive, constructive way, you can miss those things. What did the client do that was in the direction of the behavioral experiment? I bend over backwards to praise any little thing like that, even if the client just thought about it and didn't do it. I'll express amazement and ask them how it was that they remember to even think about it, with all the things that could be going on in their life, all the distractions present. That's really cool that you thought about it. And then what happened? What happened next? So there is a way you can get into this experience with the plan, even though it didn't pan out, in a way that's positive, reinforcing, and informative. So what should your demeanor be when a client comes in and basically says, I didn't do that? It's the same demeanor you are practicing all the time. That's being open, accepting, curious, non-judgmental. I'm not getting aggressive. I'm not pressuring the client to explain why they didn't do it. I'm simply going to roll with that and try to help the client and myself get back into what happened with that experiment. Now, sometimes it just turns out the experiment isn't going to be relevant right now for the client. It may have been relevant at the time the client talked about it, but their life context has shifted even in a period of 2 weeks or a month or however long they were going to run the experiment. And at this point, it's no longer relevant. This is what you're going to see in Jesse's follow-up visit. Let's take a look.